All right, hello folks, and welcome to our new series, the AI Chronicles.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be building a role-playing game using OpenAI, which is the same engine that powers ChatGPT, and see where that can take us. And we're going to be building this with all the modern software development practices, including the ideas that Ted and I have worked on in the past with architecture and with Nullables. So, and we're going to be using React and Spring Boot. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Oh, and of course, we're going to be pair programming, which is something I'm looking forward to. And you can see here, we've got a dark mode. Woo! I know that'll make some people happy. And we've got a new tool for doing pairing, which is called Tuple, which allows us to share the screen much, much more smoothly than we did in our previous yacht season.
Yeah, Tuple, so basically, James is hosting the IDE, but I'm going to be accessing it remotely. And since he's on a Mac, that's okay because I'm used to the Mac shortcuts. So for the most part, other than a couple of other little changes, that'll work just fine. And Tuple has graciously given us free license, so kudos to them. But basically, kudos to them for such a great product. Like I'm running this, but it feels just about local. So that's really good.
Yeah, we've only done a little bit of work with it so far, but so far it's looking much better than the other tools we've tried. Latency is basically non-existent. It's almost like typing on your own machine. Yeah. It will be like typing on my own machine for me because I'm hosting it. Right. But so you all will see the actual latency that you get as a pair because that's what's being streamed.
Yep.
Hey, Simon.
Welcome back. Long time no see.
So in terms of what we're going to be building here, let me go ahead and just walk us through it, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
So, of course, we are going to be using all the good XP, extreme programming practices, pairing, test-driven development, lots and lots of test-driven development.
Yep.
I have an integration script set up so we can do a continuous integration with this. Although since there's just the two of us, it's not as necessary as you would have on a team.
Yeah.
But by continuous integration, I do mean that in the original sense of the word, where we're going to be committing to trunk regularly, not using a CI build server.
Right.
Using a lot of the stuff that you can find in my book, which is The Art of Agile Development. Got a copy right here, in fact. Ta-da! It's got a goldfish on the cover. And the plan here is ultimately what we're trying to create is a compelling role-playing game that's about robots on a deserted wasteland. And maybe you can talk about that, Ted, because it was actually your idea what the specific setting was going to
be. So I was thinking a lot about this when James and I were first talking about it, and I had read this book a while back, and I'm blanking on the author, Hogan. James P. Hogan. Anyway, he wrote a lot of sort of really, really good sci-fi books, and one of them was about basically where through to some freak of cosmic rays or whatever, robots evolved and basically evolved into a civilization, and so that plus the idea of a ship crash landed on a planet, to sort of that typical thing, and sort of combining the two together. And one of the nice things about having the robot civilization is, since we're going to have OpenAI as backing the conversations, if it sounds a little bit odd, well, that's okay. They're robots.
They're robots. So they're supposed to sound odd.
Yeah. And as I've been working with it, I've been working with AI to generate images and things like that. So like the robots images that we use for our promos and the spaceship that crashed that image, those were all from Midjourney, which is one of the most frustrating, really nice, but also so frustrating. Like I can tell you how frustrating it is to generate some of these images. Like, no, stop using orange for this thing.
You were telling me earlier that originally you wanted to have a robot fighting a dragon.
Yes, yeah.
And you could not get it to make them the same size.
Could not get it. Yeah, it was like somehow deep in its understanding, whatever you want to call that understanding of dragons and anything else, is dragons are always 3 times as big. You could tell it like, no, I want this other thing to be like 30 meters tall. Nope. Then the dragon's 3 times as big.
Right.
And so I kind of gave up on that. But yeah, like I was also trying to get, so for our sort of heads up display, that's going to be the UI, I was trying to get it to create that. And it kept wanting, this must be like almost like a trope of futuristic heads up displays. They have to have these circular things. It's like, I don't want circular things. I wanted like, angular things. And it was just lots of battling mid journey to try to get it right. And the minute I was saying, oh, I wanted to see like an orange planet out of the viewfinder, and then it makes everything orange. It's like, no. Just apply it to this part. So yeah, but it's been fun. I've been playing around also with just a little bit of ChatGPT, having it generate some conversations, and it's gonna be really interesting to figure out like how we're gonna do the prompting. So this is gonna be fun.
So we're of course not the first people to try to do a role playing thing with OpenAI. It's kind of an obvious thing to do. And there was a thread on Hacker News recently about it's actually really good at role playing. And maybe the reason it hallucinates is because that's all it does is role play, which I thought was really interesting. So I think the twist we're going to put on this is that the big danger with providing unfettered access to the OpenAI backend is it can be jailbroken, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of the fact that it has this conversational engine to try to make a game that's really heavily emphasizing the conversations. And so that's why we've got this idea of the multiple robot factions. We can actually have them all playing off of each other. And of course, we saw this research paper about some researchers who made a little AI village where the various actors in the village would communicate with each other. And that sounds very cool as well.
Yeah.
So this isn't going to be your typical RPG with lots of going down into the cellar to fight rats. It's really going to be focused more on the conversation and role play aspect than sort of your classic computer RPG dice rolling that you see, which of course is what computers have always been good at historically. So I know you know this, Ted, but I don't think a lot of the viewers know this. I am an avid role player. I play D&D in my basement, as is tradition, every week with friends. And then I have another friend where we try a whole bunch of different role-playing games every other week. We just recently played some Mouse Ritter, which is a really neat system, as well as Monster of the Week and Dungeon Crawl Classics, a lot of role-playing games. So we're going to try to make this more like a tabletop experience than sort of your classic computer RPG. And how much we can do that, I don't know. But one of the things that we're going to do is the prompts are going to come from the back end and not the user. The user is not going to be able to type in their prompts directly. They will still have an interface that will generate prompts that will, tell OpenAI to give us something back. And we're hoping that will prevent the sort of derailing that you see in these other RPG experiments, where you can basically, the user types in, oh, and now I have a wand of dragon slaying, and the computer says, oh yeah, you've always had a wand of dragon slaying. Right. So we're going to try to make it a proper game. That's the long-term vision. Anything else you want to say about that before I get into the details, Ted?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So that's the long-term vision, but the reality is that doing a live stream for 3 hours every week, where we are invariably going to have a lot of sidetracks, because that's just the way we roll here.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, that's why we're here. I think that's why some of you are here. Right. So, yeah. So we're not going to be able to, that's not that much time. So chances are good we're not actually going to end up making a compelling role-playing game in which the player negotiates with a complex robot civilization. We will make a very small piece of that. And that's where this mission comes in. Our first mission to achieve this vision is a proof of concept that demonstrates the first 3 major gameplay systems. And that's the conversations, environmental hazards, and conflict. It's not a game without conflict or risk or something that can go wrong. If it's just you chatting with a robot, then that's interesting, but it's not a game yet. So that's our first mission, is to get something game-like going. I don't know if we're even going to get that much done, but that's where we're going to start.
Yeah.
We're not going to have multiple factions to begin with. We're not going to have persistence for multiple players. We don't think that's the most interesting thing of what we're doing here. So
No.
probably never going to do that. All right. So if we go through this planning process, you start out with a big picture vision, and then you narrow down and say, well, what's the thing we're going to do in the next 3 to 6 months? And that's the mission. And then you narrow down even further from there. Well, what's something we can deliver that will bring value to our business in some way? Now, there is no real business here, so we're just pretending, role playing, being in
We're role
in a
playing in a
business.
business, building a role playing game.
Yeah, I heard you like meta, so I put some
Yes.
meta in your meta. So for this pretend company that we're not actually part of, the first valuable increment is probably about getting funding, because making games costs money, or proving to the publisher that we're on the right track. So that first valuable increment is just a conversation with a robot that has some sort of game aspect where you can either succeed or fail. That we might actually be able to do in this stream. We might be able to get that much done. I don't know. And then Ted and I spent some time before the first stream breaking that down even further. What are some things that will show visible progress towards that goal? That's what a user story is. It's not a ticket in Jira. Just for those of you who are in that kind of company, a user story shows progress towards the current valuable increment.
Sorry, I'm laughing. I'm laughing because one of the other things I was doing was like coming up with names for things, like names for the planets and names for the factions. And one of the names for the factions was the Jira,
Right.
as the evil faction. So
I love that. We should totally do that.
I'm totally on
Jira.
board. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are, of course, a whole bunch of things we have to do to have this first valuable increment done. But we want to start out with just a placeholder communication with the OpenAI service, because we think that's where there's going to be a lot of interest. I mean, I want to see how that works. I imagine you all want to see how that works too. So that's where we're going to start. And we want to do a walking skeleton. A walking skeleton is when you exercise every part of the system from front end to back end. And I'm just looking at the chat. Yeah, Tram, I love it. So we're going to start out by making a walking skeleton. So eventually what that means is that using React on the front end, you'll type something in and it will actually communicate with OpenAI and send something back. And that will be the very beginning of our first valuable increment. And then we will start putting some game around that.
Right.
But just getting that walking skeleton going, I think it's going to be several episodes, several streams before we get that going.
Yeah.
So where we're going to start is with that first conversation with OpenAI, and not conversation as the user conversation, but just computer talking to OpenAI.
Computer conversation, yeah.
And seeing something back.
Yeah.
So that's what we've got so far in terms of plan. We were going to actually build out the specific engineering tasks on stream. But before we do that, anything you want to add there, Ted?
I don't think so.
Okay. So I'm just looking at the chat again. Yeah, we need to put an apostrophe in there. Everybody knows good science fiction has apostrophes in it.
So yeah, that should have been a totally apostrophe. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The Jira.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. There we go. By the way, Simon, I have not seen the AI image Muppets, but that sounds hilarious just from the title alone. So I have to check that out. So should we talk about engineering tasks?
Yeah. What's going to be our first engineering tasks?
Yeah. So this sort of one thing I think a lot of people miss about agile planning and extreme programming, and when they talk about user stories, is it's sort of turned into this, let's just give tickets to engineers. And I think what's missed is that this planning of figuring out the engineering task is actually design work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a process of figuring out, well, what are we going to build, and approximately how does it all fit together? And I know that you and I, Ted, have a pretty different approach to initial design. I think we tend to end up in the same place, but
Right.
we approach it differently. So Ted and I actually, before the stream, we started to work out these engineering tasks, and we realized there's different ways to do this, and we're
Right.
not in total agreement on it.
Right.
So
Right.
that could be a really interesting conversation to have on stream.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the difference there is that I think, and I don't want to mischaracterize your position here, but I think Ted prefers to start sort of outside in, and I tend to prefer to start what I would call middle out or bottom up, but is really about, oh, let's just start with what's most interesting and work out from there. Um, so is that a good characterization?
Well, I think that the danger is you've used terms that might not be clear to everyone. So so outside in basically is the way I think about it is, especially for something that is user facing, right? Person facing. What do they see, and then what can they do?
Right.
And I want to start there because a lot of times, like, I'm given stuff. It's like, hey, do stuff, and it's like, well, okay, what do they see, and what do you want them to do? And sometimes that question is or the lack of sort of a response or clear response is a sign that it hasn't been quite thought through, which is very different from the early days in my career when you'd be handed a 200-page document specifying precisely what's going on.
And just to be clear, that was not a better world. It was better in some ways and worse in others.
It was better in that somebody actually sat down and thought, and clearly, like, I've read some, when I was at eBay, there were some really good PRDs, product requirements documents, where it was clear they had thought about what is the behavior of this thing when they do this thing and the interactions with this other thing. On the other hand, it was way overspecified in some cases, and plus everything else about it was terrible in terms of like deployments and shared huge enterprise databases and all that kind of stuff. So, but like having people think up front and really collaborate on that. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like that's too much work for people, and it's like, no, let's just get started. And like, I understand that part as well, because I'm all about doing things and getting feedback and building on that. But like, what's our goal? What are we trying to do? And what are the first things we'd like to see? I often think about like, what is the most risky part, or what's the part we least understand? Let's address that. And so I'm not 100% sort of outside in, but that definitely, like, if we've thought about some of that stuff, that's where I want to start. Like, what, and it's not always at the beginning either of some process. It might be in the middle of like, okay, assume this and assume this. Now start here. What do they see, and what can they do?
Yeah, I suspect, as on so many things, that when we really get into it, we're in violent agreement.
Yeah.
So I have a story to tell about this, creative requirements document up front. And it sounds so good. And you actually see people on Hacker News, for example, people saying, well, we just need to nail down the requirements in advance. And the problem is the failure modes on that are immense. And the most common failure mode back in the bad old days of the 90s, when people were doing a lot of this, was that the people making the requirements document weren't actually talking to stakeholders. They were just making stuff up. And then they would hand it to you. And of course, it would take them a long time. They would hand it to you. You'd go develop it, and you wouldn't ever show it to people until the end. And then they would say, well, that's not what we want. And there's a lot of very notable failures as a result of this. I actually talk about one in the first chapter of my book about this FBI project that cost
Yes, the infamous FBI file project.
Yeah, virtual case file. So, and I actually have a story about that, where it was a smaller project. We were doing a little CRM tool for at the time, well-known operating system company, but not so well known that they still exist. They did a famous networking OS, and we actually, so I was lead for that project, and I said, well, let's build a requirements document, because this was in the day where I still thought all this was a great idea. And so I talked to the stakeholders, and I got them, and we built a prototype in not in. It was a Java front end, or it's just a Java desktop app, and it wasn't Swing. It was like the
original AWT.
No, actually, I think it was Swing.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it was the Java desktop app, and so we built a prototype and we showed it, and we had them click around, and they're like, yeah, this is what we want. We created a document with screenshots and did all this prioritization. What do you need in the first version? What can we push off to the second version? And when we finally delivered it, they looked at us and said, we wanted a web app, or we wanted a Java app. And I said, well, this is a Java app. I said, you saw it. You used the prototype. You said this is what you want. They said, no, like a Java app like this. And they pointed to their web browser.
Oh no. Assumptions. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, and I've seen this over and over. Even when I talk to my stakeholders, I put a lot of effort into talking to my stakeholders. Until they actually start using it, they don't really know what they want.
Yeah.
So that's the big failure mode of the requirements up front, which is that they will be wrong. You don't know how they're wrong until you start actually having people use it, but you do know that they will be wrong.
Yeah.
That said, I think that beginning with the end in mind, like knowing what you're trying to accomplish, is a good idea. And that's, of course, why we took the time to talk about the vision and mission and all this other stuff. And I think you've made a mock-up of what the user is going to see, or you
I was planning on it, and I sketched that on paper.
Hold it up to the camera.
Hold it up to the camera. So it's sort of like that.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I got sucked in by Midjourney, and it's like, oh crap, I should have just sketched this on paper and then had Midjourney blend images, because apparently it can do that, which is pretty interesting. So I did not actually get much further in the mock-up.
That's totally understandable. One of the reasons we're not going to do any front end work today is because I don't have the testing for the front end figured out yet. I'm still exploring ideas.
So this is just like a real project.
So it's just like a real project.
Oh, that mock-up, that's not ready yet. Oh, the testing for this part, no, that's not ready yet either.
Yeah, that's all right. But we know approximately what we want to have. We're going to have sort of a big part of the window. It's all going to be text-based, although
there'll be some image sort of adornments, but yeah, it's all going to be text.
It might be fun in the future to hook up to a Midjourney-like service and have it generate images for us on the fly.
Yes.
But that's not part of this mission. We're gonna have a sort of textual history. We'll have an area where people can enter what they want to do, but it's not going to be free form. We'll give them options to choose from, sort of old Bethesda style, where you say, I want to do this sort of thing, and then it generates the text that turns into. And then over on the right-hand side, I think we're going to put some stylistic choices, like, do you want to be lawful evil or chaotic good, or do you want to be silly or serious? Because one thing I know from doing a lot of live in-person tabletop is that people just thrive. They delight in doing silly things in a role-playing game. Yeah. So we want to give lots of options to either be silly or serious. Hey, Oya, welcome. So that's sort of the user's view of it. Now, you sort of were implying that outside in involves figuring out what the user is going to see first. And that's not how I understood outside in to work. I agree that that's something that you want. You always want to have sort of a general idea of where are we going with this. And you want to have the ability to flesh it out. But my understanding of outside in was more, what do we build first?
So I guess I didn't finish explaining. I think I've got on my own tangent. And so I would likely build a static, I might start with like a static UI or something that, is a tiny bit code generated, just to get a sense of, going back to that, what you were saying earlier, it's like, until somebody feels it, like can actually click on something. This is why, like, some of those prototype tools can come in handy in that very early stage. But I prefer, like, why don't I just develop that? That's like, I can just write code that has hard coded stuff. It has a layout. And then I will write the next piece of code. And this is where sort of the mockist might say, okay, you mock it, and it's like, well, no, I'm actually starting to develop real code. And I basically write more code and more code and refactor my way. So it's sort of like this outside in refactoring my way to sort of the individual objects, the sort of the leaf objects that then serve as your domain, assuming that you end up with one. But I may have stuff just in my controller class, the first class you hit, and all the stuff's in there until I start seeing, okay, what does this need? And then I'll pull it out, and then I'll make a decision at that point. I might have enough information where I might say, okay, now I know what domain objects I need, what components I need, and then sort of dive into there. And so I don't know that that's strict anything. It's basically just using the outside in to inform that first step, which I find really difficult, to like, what's the first thing I develop? And so that helps guide me, and then I can start not focusing so much necessarily on the pure front end, but more like the subcutaneous or just below that. What are the interactions?
Mm-hmm. I will definitely work that way sometimes. In fact, in my testing without mocks pattern language, there's this pattern called grow evolutionary seeds, which is basically what you're talking about. Start in the controller, build what you need, and then start extracting stuff out. And in fact, start out by hard coding your responses and your commands,
right,
and then pull those out into nullables that can actually talk to the outside world and render stuff on the screen. That's not the way I typically work, though. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. Absolutely.
Well, you wrote about it, so clearly it can't be wrong.
Well, yeah. I mean, if I wrote about it, it must be good, right? That's true of everything I write, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, please. So what I will often do is, you sort of touched on this earlier, on a brand new project, and to be honest, most of us are not working on brand new projects. So a lot of this conversation is kind of moot.
Yeah.
Because you've got the structure already, and now the question is really about how do we refactor and get stuff where we need it to be. But on a brand new project, I will often just sort of think through, what is this going to look like? And then I will start with the part that I think is most unknown. I want to say even most risky.
Right. But I always use the whenever I would work and we'd have like a backlog and a Kanban board or whatever you want to call it. And there was no other ordering kind of way to say, no, this is the next thing we do. It's like, what are we most afraid of? Like that gut feeling of what do you like, what makes your stomach churn a little bit?
Yeah. And then work on that first. That's where your risk is.
Exactly.
That's where things are going to go wrong. So for in this case, and we sort of made this decision already by choosing to start with a placeholder communication with OpenAI. The thing that's most unknown for us is the conversation with OpenAI.
Right.
Like we haven't done React before, at least not together. But it has been done. Like a lot of people have done that.
It's fairly well trodden path. Yeah.
I have no concerns about being able to figure that out. Although they did just completely redo their website, and it looks a lot different than the last time I looked at it. But that's the nature of front-end development. I thought React was fairly stable.
It's May, so let's change the website.
Yeah.
It's a new month.
If we're lucky, they won't make any major changes before the end of the stream, like today, or the overall stream. But so I think OpenAI is kind of the most interesting part for us to work on in terms of, well, where's our risk and how do we actually talk to it? So that's why we're starting there. And then, but there's the additional question of, as we're doing this work, we could say, well, let's build out sort of our back-end communication with the front end. And we could actually start out sort of thinking about, well, what's this going to be like, and do kind of an outside in where we design a little bit of a REST API and then have that talk to an OpenAI adapter, and then have that talk to a HTTP client of some sort, which actually does the communication. But what I do is I sort of mentally go through that, and then I tend to start at the bottom. So like, I know we're going to have, let me just start typing away here. I know we're going to have ultimately, we're going to have a front end user interface in React. That's going to have a fetch to backend. Then we're going to have a backend API in Spring Boot. And that's going to be a controller. And that's going to talk to probably an OpenAI wrapper, which will talk to an HttpClient wrapper, which will do network communication to OpenAI.
Right.
This is the process I'll do. I'll sort of say, well, what do I imagine this looks like? And the thing is that none of this changes depending on, this is going to be the same regardless of what our UI actually looks like. So at this point, until we have some of this scaffolding built out, I don't really care what the UI looks like. And so I would tend to just start here. Let's build this out, and then let's build this on top of it. And we'll use test to test drive that as we go. And then once we've done this much, our tests can basically be our placeholder communication with OpenAI, and we're done with this story. So that's how I think about it. It sounds like you've got some leaf blowing going on in the background.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to mute myself. Yeah, and so like this is where the unknowns, like you said, it's like the UI is not really the unknown. Mm-hmm. And so it's really the back end that's unknown. And so even though I would tend to do outside in, it's more to figure out if we haven't already figured out what that interaction is between the player and the actual system. But it, unlike sort of a more line of business application where there's a core domain that you're interacting with mostly, here the Spring Boot app itself is sort of this just intermediary between it and the OpenAI on the back end. So yeah,
there will be some logic eventually, because that's where all the prompting is going to be happening and so forth. But at least for this first story, where it's just about ultimately about getting that walking skeleton where we're just sending stuff over, there really isn't any. It's just glue code on the back end.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of even here, though, we could do it outside in or inside out, in that we could start out with the OpenAI wrapper and then build the HttpClient wrapper. Or we could start with the HttpClient wrapper and then build the OpenAI wrapper.
I don't have a strong feeling.
I, again, would tend to start here. And I think that's because I find it, so the reason people like outside in is my understanding, is because it allows them to sort of work out the interface that they need for the things that are further down.
Right.
But I find that I make a better interface when I think about the thing that's providing the interface as rather than it's just there to provide an interface to serve something else. I sort of anthropomorphize my object design. I think, what does this thing care about? Like, what does my HTTP client care about? What does it need to provide? And I'm going to be thinking, well, what does OpenAI wrapper need from it?
Right.
As I'm doing that, I don't want to overbuild it.
Right.
But by starting at the bottom or in the middle, depending on what I want, it allows me to create, in my mind, it allows me to create a better design.
Yeah, that's interesting because to me it's the opposite. It's like I feel like you can maybe even kind of call it sort of pull based versus push based or something. That's sort of what it feels like to me. Is like, I want to know how this thing, what is, like, to me the objects have roles. What role is this playing? But in order to know what role it's playing, I have to figure out what play is it's in, who is it interacting with, what is the one, and really, especially something that's talking to the outside from the hexagonal architecture point of view. It's outbound or driven or whatever you want to call it, but it's way back when we used to call it service providers. It's a service provider, but I much prefer instead of saying what does this service provide, it's what do I need from a service that this one happens to be one that provides it. And it's not because a lot of people say, oh, because you want the optionality of trading it out. It's like, for me, it's like, no, that has nothing to do with it. It has to do with, I want the thing to be as easy to use by the rest of the code as possible. And in my experience, when I've started at that, at that edge first, at that object that's going to provide the thing, I then have to, when I'm trying to plug it into the thing uses it, it's like, oh, that was kind of awkward, and then I have to refactor it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm much more, like you're saying about sort of growing seeds. It's like, let me put all the stuff here, and then I'll start extracting things out until I finally get maybe, oh, okay, now this is what the thing is going to need, because I have enough context to figure that out.
So I think we should ask the chat. Should we start with OpenAI or the OpenAI wrapper, or should we start with the HttpClient wrapper? I think we're both in agreement, Ted, that we want both of these things, right?
Yeah.
And I think actually we'll probably reuse the HttpClient wrapper we built for the Yacht program,
right?
Rather than build it again, because we have a nice nullable HTTP client that's not 100% done, but should be good enough for our needs.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so Simon says the biggest unknown is OpenAI. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a vote for the OpenAI wrapper, I think. Yeah. So live coding sort of hits it. There's not a lot to do in the OpenAI wrapper without talking to it through HTTP,
right?
Which is part of why I would be inclined to do the HTTP client wrapper first.
Yeah, because here we have, if we were to say, well, what is the internal domain logic for handling the prompts and storing information? Like if we were to focus on that, then there'd be a lot more to guide us on what this wrapper would do. But since we're just saying, look, just the connection to this,
we just want to send a prompt.
We want to send something and get something back, and that would be success if we get, when we get that to work. In this case, it feels almost more like a spike than actual development, but because it does have that feel of like we don't know where it's going to go.
Right.
But and so with sort of that view, then it's like, that's the place we start. Hey, Astrid, 10:30 p.m. Sorry.
Astrid, welcome. Yeah, except I don't, Simon, I don't think it's going to be a console app. I think it's just going to be a test.
Yeah,
we'll make a test, talk to it.
Yeah, I think that if we can get the test to talk to it and fake a response or null a response, and then hook it up to the real thing, then we can start building on that.
Okay. So in terms of engineering tasks, I think what we need to do here is we need a OpenAI wrapper that talks to real OpenAI. We're going to want to make that nullable. We're going to want an HTTP client wrapper that communicates via HTTP, maybe HTTPS, probably HTTPS. And that actually is something that we haven't done yet. So it's going to be a little bit trickier than maybe we might have done.
Shouldn't be. But we'll see.
We'll see. I don't remember. It can be tricky when you're writing in focused integration tests, narrow integration tests of it, because then you're setting up a server to test against. But I don't think we ended up doing that.
Yeah, no, we didn't. Yeah.
Okay. And then so this is probably just, reuse our HTTP client wrapper. Anything else that we need to do to get the placeholder communication? And then I think a manual test of communication.
Yeah.
That should be enough to get us through this story, I think.
I think so.
All right. Well, the thing is, Oya, we've already built the HTTP client wrapper, and I just know from experience that you tend to want to have a low-level wrapper for the protocol that's separate from the higher level wrapper, which is about the semantics of the service you're talking to. That just makes things a little bit cleaner, and particularly is a lot more reusable. Like the HTTP client, we can use over and over again. So,
and this is the sort of the difference between hexagonal and its adapters, where you're basically replacing the entire adapter, whatever it's, both how it's interacting with the thing and then the underlying HTTP or whatever mechanism it's using, versus having the basically two pieces.
Yeah. If we didn't already have the HTTP client wrapper that we built over in the Yacht program,
right,
I might start with OpenAI, and that actually is more of a top-down versus bottom-up
thing.
Like we might just build it all in the OpenAI wrapper and then factor it out if and when we needed another HTTP communicating thing. But since we already have it, we might as well use it. So let's start out by building that OpenAI wrapper. I think the general consensus in the chat, it wasn't strong, but I saw sort of general consensus that we might as well start out with the OpenAI wrapper.
Yeah.
So this is going to be, so here's the structure of the code, folks. We've got a backend directory structure. We've got a front-end directory structure. These are modules in IntelliJ, which means that they're sort of like little projects of their own. This one's configured to use Spring Boot. This one's configured to use JavaScript. And I'm going to let you start us off, Ted, because I'm not sure where we're going to start here.
Right. So, let's see. So we got our app there. So the OpenAI wrapper, do we want?
So I would call this, so I would probably, so we decided that we were going to use A-frame architecture for this, since in the last stream we used
well, we started with
hexagonal architecture, which is so similar to A-frame architecture. I don't know that there's a point in making a strong distinction. But if we're going to use A-frame architecture, what I would do is I'd create an infrastructure folder or package under AI Chronicles. And then in that, I would make a class that was specifically named after the thing we're interfacing with. So I would call it OpenAI. Uppercase, really? Is that how it works? Oh, the class is named OpenAI.
Yeah. Let's do don't ask again. Except this is going to be our test.
And let's make a test for that.
So let me move this to the right place.
Actually, I'd probably call it OpenAiClient.
Because
that's how I tend to name these things.
Well, let me move it first, because I put it in the wrong place. Okay. And then let's... And we can create a test. Let's see if that works. Hey, that worked. Hey, Dota, welcome. Simon says we should use ChatGPT to co-pilot our coding. No, that's a bit too.
Yeah, that's too much.
So the OpenAI client, what do we want from it? What do we first like?
I mean, I think we're going to end up changing this. So I think just the placeholder is, we
want to send a prompt and get a response.
Yeah. Maybe we can just call it prompt. Or so let's, prompt. Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, so here's something interesting. This is what I call fake it once you make it in the testing without mocks patterns, which is that if we have a low level wrapper, in this case, HttpClient, that is nullable. We don't actually need our high-level wrapper, which in this case is the OpenAI client.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need that to talk to the real OpenAI, which is good because there's a lot of services out there that don't have a test mode or that cost money when you call them.
Right.
So the way this works, do you mind if I just pseudocode some stuff out for you?
Yeah.
The way this works is that first we set up the, well, there's two parts I usually do this in. So test one is makes the request, or makes the HTTP request, I should say. And then test two is parses the HTTP response. I'll typically do that in two tests.
Mm-hmm.
And the first test is going to be that what we're going to do is we're going to first create a null HTTP client, make the request, and then we'll check that the correct request was made. And you'll recall, maybe some of our listeners remember, that there's going to be this ability to do output tracking.
Right.
So we can see what request was made. And then for the second test, what we'll do is we'll create a null HTTP client with a specific response, hard-coded,
Mm-hmm.
make the request, and then we'll check the return value to see that the response
Right.
was parsed correctly.
Right.
Then you typically go on there and spend the most of your work on your handling.
Right.
Because that's where all the work is.
That's where all the fun is, yeah.
Yeah. So, but what's not, there's sort of a test zero here, which is manually figure out what the request and response should be. And then those get pasted into the test.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the error handling is what I call paranoid telemetry, which is whenever the actual live service doesn't give us a response according to what we understand it should be, it blows up and causes an error to appear in our logs.
Right.
So, so I think our first step is to actually just use a tool such as HTTP, which is an HTTP tool. It's sort of like curl, only a lot more user-friendly.
Could also use IntelliJ. IntelliJ has a built-in HTTP client.
Perfect. Let's do that because that'll be a little bit easier to work with. So I think our first step is to just start talking to OpenAI and seeing what comes back.
So I'll call this OpenAI. So we got to figure out what is the endpoint that we even talk to.
Yeah, I have no idea. Have you looked into this at all? I'll admit I've not looked into this. I kind of thought you were going to, and I didn't ever check with you on that.
I looked at it a bit, but I didn't get down to the precise things because I figured we'd just bring up the right page.
Yeah, well, let's do that. Let's go ahead and pull that up. So do you have a URL we can paste in here?
Yeah, so if you go to, actually, I'll just do it. That looks like we'll need to log in. So Tramstars and Summers, so we're going to be using OpenAI to generate the conversations that you're going to have with that robot civilization. It is not code generation. It is going to be basically serving as the source of all the creative responses and things that will happen in the universe.
Yeah. And the reason for that is because historically, computer role-playing games have been kind of a pale imitation of tabletop role-playing games because they couldn't understand language. So they really focused on sort of the dice rolls and the rules rather than the role playing aspect.
Yeah.
Um,
Or they were very like there was a story mapped out, and you had you had choices at each point, and
there was a conversation tree.
Yeah, exactly.
And as an avid tabletopper, the idea of making a computer role playing game that actually emulates that tabletop experience is pretty exciting to me. I have my doubts about how well it can be done, because the problem is that OpenAI has got a token limit. It can really only do so much, and you hit that token limit really fast from my understanding of things. So we're still going to have to, I think, program in a story that the computer follows. But I'm hoping that we can make
Right.
it a little more flexible than what you get from your typical computer role-playing game.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, Stuigi. Yeah, but this is not, never has been, never will be, have the computer do the programming for us.
Right. I've actually played enough with that to know how horrible that is.
Yeah. I mean, would you, given the choice between reading somebody else's code and writing it, reading is 10 times harder than writing code. And so why I would make my job of writing code all about reading somebody else's code?
Well, especially when it gets it wrong or has such a short memory, it's like, wait, that's not the front end page that matches the back end code that you just wrote 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so but one thing that has done, and you talked about this, is like you have to constantly like feed it like what is what's the current context, and you can basically, or you can not assume that it remembers anything. It's very much an amnesiac. Like it doesn't remember anything.
Yeah, so I had a buddy who did a OpenAI API hackathon just a couple weeks ago, and he was telling me that you hit that context limit really, really fast, and you really have to treat each exchange as a brand new thing, and you sort of seed OpenAI with the context every time you start a new conversation, because it will not remember far enough to really give consistent answers.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one we're going to use, if we're going to use GPT-3 or GPT-4, but GPT-4 is a lot more expensive than GPT-3.
Yeah, I would say, we can change that later once we want to.
Yeah, when we actually want to spend money.
When we actually, I mean, the cost difference
is going to cost money. Every time we make a request to OpenAI, it costs us a couple cents, or maybe even a couple of bucks over the course of a stream.
Yeah, I set a hard limit just in case. So
good. Yeah, nothing like having your software go wild and then getting a $10,000 bill from AWS sometime down the road, or in this case, OpenAI.
Can you do a paste? So.
Hey, I noticed that we're up at time for our first break. Should we pause for a few minutes?
Yeah, let's do that, because it's a good time to do that. So
all right. So when we come back, I think what we're going to do is we're going to try to do our first communication with OpenAI, the OpenAI service, and we'll see what happens.
All right, we're back.
Okay. Hopefully with only a few more exposures of private API keys and passwords.
Yeah.
Remaining.
Password wasn't great. The AI API keys, they're easy enough to click a button and regenerate. So I'll be doing that. I'll be doing that anyway, just because.
We're still sort of working out some of the details with tuple, and the clipboard didn't work the way we thought it would.
Yep. Learn something new every day. All right, so let's see. This was OpenAI. Oh, look, even autocomplete. Nice.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, so we've set up a environment here in IntelliJ that has the private the API key that, of course, we don't want to share on stream in it. So hopefully this will work. So the stuff you just deleted, that was the post payload, right?
I deleted the wrong thing. Okay.
Yeah, live coding. There's a lot of truth to that. I'm not sure how IntelliJ works, but in a typical HTTP request, you do need a blank line. Okay, that autocomplete didn't appear to work properly. Oh, we need to be in the dev environment.
That's why.
Okay. Okay, good.
Oh, that's why it was yellow underlined. Okay.
Yeah. Now so an HTTP request in the spec requires a blank line after it.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and try that.
All right.
Oh, this is interesting. Here, let's make this a little bigger.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm glad it hid the request because that's where the API key is.
Yeah, let's not show
expand that.
Very cool.
What's content encoding BR? I'm not familiar with BR. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by what that is. Okay.
Yeah, that's not something I've ever heard of either. That doesn't.
That just doesn't look right. But anyway, let's.
Yeah.
So that's cool. It gives the usage, which is kind of nice.
Right.
So that might be something we eventually want to expose to our application so that we can say, here's how much here's how much talking to the robot is costing you.
Well, exactly, because I think we are actually, that's going to be one of the metrics we have to expose is how much is this costing.
Yes.
I think you said it was 2 cents per 10,000 tokens.
Oh, I don't remember what it is.
2 cents, $0.002 per 10,000 tokens.
I think it was
1,000 tokens.
0.00 with 3 zeros and a 2. Yeah. But we could look at the docs. It tells us how much that is.
Hopefully it won't be an issue.
Yeah.
But we've spent about a millicent of your money at this point. So thank you to Ted for sponsoring this stream. Because we are using his OpenAI account.
Yeah. I figure I've used up enough of the free chat stuff that I'm willing to throw them a few pennies.
Yeah. A format using the
Brotli. Oh, okay.
I'm not familiar with that.
That's a compression. That's a compression. One of the more newer compression ones.
Interesting.
All right. So what did it actually give us?
I didn't see a response back. So I'm going to flip over to the documentation real quick. So authentication, organizations, that's making requests. Okay. Request, blah, blah. Say this is a test.
Oh, so we told it to say this is a test, and it said this is a test.
Oh.
So it did what we asked it to.
Right. Say, my mother is a cow. I don't know why I chose that particular prompt, but I did.
Yes, Astrid, that would definitely compensate me. Thank you, Astrid.
I'm sorry.
Hey, that costs a lot of tokens for it to tell us that you can't do that.
Right. Say my mother is not a cow, and I am offended.
Okay, Suiji, the Prime sub more than pays for what we're using.
What'd you say?
Suiji asked how much does the Prime sub compensate for the token, so I'll provide a sub to token translator.
Let's see. Okay, it doesn't like any of those prompts.
Yeah, I think my mother is probably something that. How about we something that's from our domain of you have crashed on a planet?
Yeah, okay. You have crashed on a planet populated by robots. What is the first thing you say? So prompt engineering is right. So it's definitely working,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I mean it's already fun. Like
Yeah.
I could play with this all
Yeah.
day, just putting in new prompts and getting it to and see
Yep.
now
There we go.
there we go.
We're done.
Yeah, that's it. Shortest stream ever. Okay, but the good news is here we now know exactly how to prompt this
Hmm.
and how to get stuff back. So this is where we start building out. Like this is literally what we paste into um, our test here. So we've manually figured out how to make the request and the response.
Right.
So now we're going to create the null HTTP client. And when we make the request, we will put that. Well, actually, that's not what we do. We put that here.
Right. So we can actually, yeah.
So should I start programming this?
So, sure. Yeah. There's some questions I have, but we can wait on that.
Okay. Um, so let's make this first test sends prompt to OpenAI.
Yep.
And then the next test will be something along the lines of parses response from OpenAI.
Yeah, so Simon, the that's where I think the bulk of the work is going to be is what do we need to retain, what do we need to hold on to, and what do we need to sort of send with every prompt. So I've actually been playing with the API in the playground to see what kind of prompts I need, and yeah, you sort of need, and we've sort of been talking about this already. Sort of what's the minimum we can send that has it retain sort of the context of where things are. So that will be the interesting part. And yeah, I have seen where you can give it a token so to correlate. I'm not sure how well that works, but we'll find out.
Okay, so I'm just thinking about what I want to do here. I think we're going to just say new OpenAI client. And to begin with, what we're going to want to pass in to the OpenAI client is that I think the API key, right?
Yes.
Because we don't want to do that. That can just be part of
That'll be part of the config.
The config.
Yeah.
So my API key. Because this is nullable, we're not going to actually talk to the real OpenAI in our tests. That would be slow and costly. And then you had a trick. I think you.
Yep.
Yes. Love that trick.
It's one of my faves.
Yeah, it's good. And then here we're going to generate the constructor. This will just be API key. And I tend to run my tests in a really fine-grained way. So if I want to run these tests, what do I type? Is it Control R?
In this case, we can do Control Shift R, which will run the basically the current context.
Perfect. I have dreams, chat, of doing a more sophisticated build that will do incremental builds for us, but at the moment, those remain
just the dreams.
So we've made the client. Then we're going to make the request. And the request is going to be, what do we want to call this? Send prompt? make prompt.
I think prompt, yeah.
I want to call this OpenAI.
Mm-hmm.
OpenAI.prompt.
Yep.
My prompt.
Yep.
Cool. 1 second. And that's going to return a string, right?
Certainly for now it will, yeah. I have to say the dark theme is still a lot of getting used to. Like seeing yellow underlines is like, what the heck does that mean?
Oh, is that the equivalent of the red underline?
That's the equivalent of the warning, which is usually sort of a light brownish wavy underline in my world. So, so I'm like, oh, that's what that is.
Okay, so we're going to make the prompt, and then make it do the prompt, and then what we want to do. Okay, so here's what we're missing here: is we need to. This is where the top down is going to break down a little bit, because what we need to do is we need to make an HTTP client. HTTP client.
Create null.
Create null.
Yep.
And then we'll pass in the HTTP client here.
Right.
But we don't want to just create that HTTP client because we're going to pull it in.
Right.
And then we're also going to want to say that we
need an output tracker. Yep.
Yeah. So we need an output tracker. I don't even remember how this works, but it's going to be the HTTP requests is HTTP client.track output.
Right.
And then here we should be able to do an assertion, and I don't remember how this works, so I might ask you to type it in. But it's
so I think
something like
oh, sorry.
We started typing at the same time. Go ahead. We basically need to assert that the HTTP requests give us the request that's written down there.
So I think HTTP requests, whatever that is. I don't remember what the method was.
Data. Or it might have been output. I think it was output.
Oh. And then contains exactly, and then there's some string output, which is basically going to be this thing.
Yeah.
I'll do that for now. Let me import write assertions. There is a bug in IntelliJ where it basically imports the wrong thing.
Oh.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. Okay. So I want to add that to our constructor. So do we want to pull in the
Yeah, we've already done all the work to make it, so let's grab it. So to do that, I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to pop over to the yacht repository. I thought was in here.
I think it might have been TDD yacht or yacht TDD.
I don't think there's anything secret in here. Yeah, it's yacht TDD. Let me go ahead and get the latest out of this. And then I'll open it up. And it's going to be in source. So I could open this in another window of IntelliJ.
Yeah.
You want me to do it that way?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay. So let's do file open. And then I'll grab that.
And new window, yeah.
Okay, and then you know this project better than I do, so I'm going to let you grab the pieces. I don't, Chat, you probably can't tell, but the ease of switching back and forth here between me doing something and Ted doing something is just fantastic. I'm really enjoying that aspect of tuple.
Actually, do you want to grab this first or the client or HTTP client first?
It doesn't matter, I don't think. We're going to need both of them.
So we had JSON HTTP client, which is actually what we want.
Mm-hmm.
So we can just grab this. Do you mind if I'm going to change a setting, which is, where is it? Tree appearance. No. I can't remember what the setting is. Okay. So that's the client. That's the request.
Right, because that's what we're going to get in our output tracker, right?
So we should be able to just grab these. And then
Sweetie asked which setting. They might be able to find it.
Oh, I was looking for the sync up the current file you're looking at with the current.
Oh yeah, it's the little target icon.
Well, that does it one-off. What I want is the setting that
there's a setting
makes
to just always
do it.
Always synchronize it. Got it.
And I don't remember. I was view mode. No, it's not view mode.
Oh, there it is. Always select open file. Fourth one down from the top.
No, I always can't see it. I don't know why it's so weird. Okay, so let's see. So that copy and paste did not
Let me try it.
Yeah, so copy from here.
We've been having a little trouble with the cut and paste with
And then paste
tuple.
there.
Yeah, there it goes.
Yeah.
There we go.
I think it's trying to be too intelligent about the clipboard.
I noticed there were some configuration options on the clipboard that we probably need to modify.
And you can probably grab also, at some point we can grab the output listener and tracker.
Yeah.
Yes, I blame dark mode as well, Sweetie. For any mistakes I make, I will be blaming dark mode.
That's right. I'm going to go ahead and grab the test for these as well while we're here.
Yep.
And there one goes there. And I think we called this an out. Okay, there's some sort of weirdness here with this OpenAI. Oh, is that our?
That's our because it put the we can put those at the top level or somewhere else. Basically, that file and this file, because that was the HTTP client stuff. It just happened to create it in that directory.
Okay, yeah, and that's the private API key that we don't want to share. So we'll make sure to wipe that. The integration script I have, by the way, blows away all unchecked in files. So we'll have to find a place to put that doesn't get.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want that in the repository anyway. So
yeah, we might just recreate it before each stream or something. Okay, so this should all work.
So it's having trouble. Oh,
right.
So there it goes. Now what? And same thing. Yep. Okay, so that looks good. And now that's good. Let's our JSON HTTP client.
Oh yeah.
So that'll be that. Just trying to get all the compile errors gone so we can actually run JSON. Track requests.
That needs to be, yeah. Going to be JSON HTTP request dot post, create post.
Right, and so the URL is basically that.
Yeah. And I don't think our what else goes in here?
The body is an object, but I'm not sure what we can put in there.
I'm just going to leave it blank for now.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So I guess we can just run it.
Yeah, let's run all the tests.
Yeah. So
well, we haven't set up a Spring Boot or no Spring Boot tests yet, have we?
We can disable this for now.
So yeah, because it's so slow.
Because it's really slow. So we'll do that. So that won't run again.
Okay, so all the code we just imported is working.
Yes, and this test is failing as expected.
Okay, good. I would like to wrong spot. What I'd like to do is I'd like to normally I would actually, if I'm going to bring in a bunch of files, I will check them in as a separate commit. And normally, actually, I think what I would have done is stash the changes we've made, bring those in, get them working, commit it, and then unstash them. But in this case, I think what I'm going to do is add everything, and then I'm going to reset the secrets that we have, which is this one. I'm also going to reset this.
Right.
And I know there's probably a way to do this in the IDE, but
there is.
I work with a lot of different tools, so I just learned how to use the command line.
Yeah. Now I have the luxury of always in IntelliJ, living in IntelliJ. So
yeah, well, you mostly work with Java, right? And your customers work with Java too.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then
I think we might want to also probably ignore this directory.
I think so too. Yeah. Get rid of this. Okay, and let's reset idea as well. So we've got the README.
That we ignored, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to commit. What we've done here is we've copied the JSON HttpClient from Yacht. Right. You want to add this to our git ignore?
Yeah.
What about that UI designer?
I think that's fine. I don't remember what that is. So one thing with ignores is I don't put leading slashes, because then as stuff gets moved around in directories, it assumes that it's off the root as opposed to just somewhere underneath.
Yeah, and I think there is actually multiple .idf files folders. So okay. we do want to keep that UI designer.xml?
Yeah, I don't think that'll hurt.
Right? Can hear you.
Yeah.
We do want to keep that.
Yeah. So let's keep the UI designer. I mean, we could look at it, but I think it's fine. Yeah, I've looked at their git ignore Suiji, and it's like I find it very confusing.
Yeah, the newer version of IntelliJ seems to automatically create a .git ignore for you, which is nice. In the .idea folder,
right?
Which is really smart. I'm surprised it took them so long to do it. So update .git ignore for ideas.
HttpClient, yeah. Yeah, the ID folder. I remember early days, people different plugins would throw stuff in all over the place, and then that created a disaster.
Okay, and then let's go ahead and take care of this private data. It's just stressing me out having that sitting in
well, once we've got our output, do we even need it anymore today? And you could just move it off into some temporary location.
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
You can just move it to temp. Yeah, so that test failed the way we wanted to. All the others were passing.
Yeah, can we see the test runs? Okay, so yeah, we expected nothing, and we got something that doesn't have a very good toString on it.
Well, that's because so what we got was literally nothing. So what this is the body, because you actually did new object.
Right.
So that's fine. We don't have to worry about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So good. We're making fairly steady progress here, I think.
Right. So what we want to do is, what do we want to do next? So we've got, we hand in the key, we do the prompt, we track the output. Of course, we're not getting anything. And we want to move this over. So that's our create null. Okay.
So Suiji says, is there value in getting this to pass now? And I don't know that I understand the question. Oh, I see what you're saying.
As in have prompt take
actually
the URL, or I guess.
Yeah, I think there actually is value in that. Let's go ahead. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to store the HTTP client in a variable.
So who knows the URL? Is that something the OpenAI client knows?
I think the OpenAI client knows the URL.
Yeah.
I think in the future we might want to make that configurable, but I'm actually not. I prefer to live in a world where deploying is really easy. Some companies set it up so the code's hard to deploy, but configuration is easy to deploy.
Right.
But configuration is code. It can break things just as badly as code can, and often worse because it doesn't have tests around it. So I don't make things configurable unless they have a genuine need to change. But since there's only one OpenAPI URL,
right, I agree. Yeah,
I would just put in a constant in this file.
Yeah. I wasn't thinking about whether it was configuration or not. Somehow I got into my head. It's like, do we pass that in every time we call prompt, or does the HTTP client know it? So it was more almost a question to myself of, no, it's OpenAI client that knows it, and yeah, absolutely a constant. Yeah.
Well, I think I was just using that as a springboard to rant.
Yes.
As we do.
Yes.
Because I do see the situation where people will make these massive config files, and they're actually really hard to understand.
Yeah.
And it's hard to find stuff because it's not cohesive. Like putting a constant here with a URL in it means that whenever you're looking at the OpenAI client, you see the URL.
Right.
And if you have a pattern of doing that in your organization, your code base, then people know, oh, if I'm modifying anything related to the OpenAI client, I look in the OpenAI client class, and there it is.
Yep.
That said, sometimes you have a situation like with a database where you have a dev database and a production database, in which case I would make it configurable, but I don't think that's the case here.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to make this a variable, how would we do that?
You can create field for parameter.
So I think what we're going to do here is we're just going to say HttpClient dot host OpenAI endpoint, which is going to be that value.
Mm-hmm.
And then that should work.
It probably won't because object won't be equal, but we'll at least get a different error.
Yeah. It won't have the same identity, but it will be the same. Like dot equals would be the same, wouldn't it?
So it's going to use, for the equals, it uses the identity. And why did it run?
Oh, right, right. By default.
Oh, I put the ignore in the wrong place. I thought it applied to the file, though. It does apply to the type. I don't know why it's not ignoring it. Oh, wait. Wrong version of JUnit, that's why. That's what we wanted. So because I think this project included test containers pulls in JUnit 4, and so this sometimes mix those up. Okay. So that's failing as expected. Tests are running the way we want them. So, all right.
Okay. Well, I don't think we need to make this pass with an empty object. I think what we want to do is just now pass in the real thing.
Yeah.
So our HTTP client is a bit. Hey, Pellet.
Hey, Pellet.
Our HTTP client is a bit incorrect because we also need to make declarations about the headers.
Yes, that's true.
And I don't think we have the ability to do that yet.
No, the HTTP client did not support that, or our client did not support that.
Yeah. So do we want to set this aside and go work on that capability, or do we want to get the payload working and then work on that?
I have no preference.
Okay. Typically, I would go work on the thing and then unstash, but I think it could be big enough that maybe we should commit this and come back to it.
Okay.
So let's go ahead. Is it ignore or disabled for this test?
It's disabled.
So if I run the tests.
Yep.
Good. So we're starting. Start on OpenAI client. So yeah, we need to open up JSON HTTP client. And how do I programmatically get, or keystroke, how do I get over here?
Option tab.
Option tab. So this is what we need. So we've got requests are tracked. Okay, so we're going to have to create a DTO for the actual data.
Yeah, that we can. I mean, that the body part is straightforward. Yeah, we just need to translate what the structure of the JSON into DTO.
Okay. So how are we going to make this track the? Well, we need to be able to control the headers, and then we need to be able to track them. So I guess before we even do the tracking, we need to actually do the headers at all.
Right.
And this is where the fact that we don't have the integration tests kind of bugs me, because we're going to add code for supporting headers, but we're not going to have any way of checking that it actually works until we talk to OpenAI again.
Yeah.
But doing integration tests on this is a big deal, because we have to make a server and do all that stuff.
Right.
So I think if this was a real project, I'd bite the bullet and do it. But on stream, I just don't think it's gonna be interesting to folks.
Yeah, I don't think that's something we want to do here.
Yeah. So how do we actually set headers?
So there are actually a couple of ways to do it. So how do we create the real? Where do we get the? So our REST template wrapper.
Yeah, we're just doing springs.
Here, that's what I was looking for. So you can either create it for all interactions, or you could do it on a per request basis. We probably want to do it on a per request basis.
I think so, yeah.
So then,
especially at the HttpClient level,
yeah.
Which is kind of reusable for any HTTP request.
So instead of post for entity, what it becomes is, I think, exchange. And then I think in here, I think the HTTP entity, this is a different exchange. So
this is not super uncommon. There's got to be an easy way to do this.
This is one of those cases where there's like 5 different ways to do things, and I'm trying to figure out which one is the most straightforward.
So Suiji's just posted its exchange with URL, HTTP method, new HTTP entity with body.
Yeah, so the HTTP entity is the one that has the headers. So, okay. So HTTP entity, and this is going to be, I don't know that matters. So I'm just sketching out request, and so then it's basically just a map of headers.
So this isn't the right place for us to do this, though.
I know. I was just experimenting with the API.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What we need to do is we need to come back up to here. We need to modify this to add the, well, I guess we'll add the headers later, but here we need to add support for exchange, URL, new HTTP entity, body.
And since we're doing a post, we need to specify that as a second parameter.
Oh, that.
There's an object, so it's
go ahead.
HTTP method post. and then the body, and then our response type, which in this case, so this is another change, is that our post is actually going to return something. We haven't needed that before.
Right. Well, let's solve one problem at a time.
Yeah. So for now, we could just do the same thing we had before, which is just return a void.
Right. We have get returning things, so we'll probably follow the same pattern we have there.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're still going to want it. What I don't know is how regular the schema of the JSON that it's returning is. But we could start with a map, and then if it looks pretty stable, then we could make it an object.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what it needs to look like. And the headers then go in here.
Does this work as is without the headers?
It should.
Okay, because we're going to have to, in order to get our nullables to work, we're going to have to reconfigure this.
Right.
So this should work exactly the way it does now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is going to fail because we don't have an exchange here.
Right.
We want this to be identical. What does exchange normally return?
Returns a T.
And it will take a T here, I presume?
No, I don't think it does. I don't remember what the T is qualified against.
Oh, it's probably on the class.
Yeah.
It'll be here.
Yes.
And this will be the request. That look right to you?
Looks right.
Okay. So we should, wants that to return void. Oh, is it response entity wrapper? What's the return type of exchange?
I'm not sure what you mean by that. Yeah, I mean that's what we could use for now. Yeah.
Yeah, that is what it actually looks like it's returning. Oh no.
Well, that's what you've defined it to return.
Yeah, never mind. We just wanted to match T of T exchange. So we've just done this before. So now this should implement that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you do this. You're more familiar with it than me.
And so then this should be we've been passing this as string. Okay, that's fine.
And then Sweetie says I had it right, actually. That's okay. I'll fix it in a minute.
Request. Response. We don't need anything else.
Signature should be identical to what we're passing in.
No, because because you changed it, but it was right before.
Yeah.
So this should be basically this.
Sweetie says response entity, response entity.
Yeah.
Yeah, response entity wrapper. Good.
And then this is that. And then this. We have to
real response entity.
Yeah, so we have to do that. And we could extract this if we wanted. Yep. That looks right.
Yep. It looks exactly like what we had for line 78, so that's good. Okay. And then
right. So we're ignoring the return value for now, but that's fine. So,
yeah.
So this is the equivalent, or should be the equivalent of the post.
Right. Now, I think if we run those, I don't know if it's compiling yet. Looks like it's not quite, because down here we need to implement.
Oh, we need to implement the stubbed, right?
But let's go ahead and leave that out. Now everything's compiling. If we run the tests, I expect all of our null tests to fail because they're still going to be depending on the old code. Why did that not fail? Oh, it didn't fail because it doesn't need to do anything.
Right. I mean,
we call it and we're done.
We called it and yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So actually, if we look at our old post for entity, yeah, it's a no op.
Yeah.
Now we should be able to get rid of post for entity. Is there a quick and easy way to do that? Can we?
You should be able to save delete, and it might do a cascade.
Okay. You probably can't see that.
Not all of it. Yeah. So now it's doing basically a cascade delete of that.
Cool.
Yep.
That was less painful than I thought it would be.
Yeah, as long as you start from the base interface, and you want to delete that, and then all the implementations go away.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So I want to check this in.
Yeah, I was going to say that we should do commit here.
So what we've done is we've refactored JSON HttpClient to use REST template.exchange instead of REST template, instead of dot. What's the one called?
Post. Post for entity.
So I think what we're going to do next, it's about time for our next break, but I think what we're going to do next is actually support headers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay.
Yep. All right, we're back.
All right. So I realized maybe it might be worth explaining what's going on here because
I was
sort of dived into it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, even I was like, okay, what are we doing? What do we do next? So yeah, so for those who are not well versed in, well, and basically what we copied, like we have the context. So do you want to sort of run through it?
Yeah, I'll do that. So of course, what we're doing here is we're creating the OpenAI client, which is going to talk to OpenAI. And you saw, if you've been watching, you saw that we did a manual test of that, so we know what query to do. It's right here. And we know what comes back from that. To actually make the post, we're using an HTTP client that Ted and I made in the previous stream that we did for Yacht, which we're calling, if this is season 2, that was season 1, although they're obviously completely different code bases. But that's this JSON HTTP client. And it's really just a wrapper around REST template, which is something built into Spring, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Spring MVC has this REST template thing, and it handles all the underlying interactions with doing all the making connections and fetching things, as well as doing things like converting objects to JSON and vice versa.
Yeah, which raises the question, like, why not just call Spring's REST template? Like, why do we have this JSON HTTP client thing? And there's two reasons for that. The first one, to me, is the most important, which is that I never, ever use third-party code as is unless it's absolutely pervasive, like part of the core language framework.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is as they change, and open source software tends to be particularly bad at this, and JavaScript open source software tends to be really bad at this.
Yeah.
As it changes, they will make breaking changes, or they will just be, it's no longer the new hotness. You're supposed to do it another way. And if you're using it throughout your code base, that is a major, major maintenance headache.
Yeah.
Security, there's all these things that can go wrong with third-party code. So if you wrap it up behind a class, then there's only one place you have to make those changes.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens less often, but sometimes you might switch out to a completely different library. Again, having one place that wraps it up is the place to do that. So that's the main reason for JSON HTTP client. It's just wrapping up the Spring third-party code so that when, not if, it changes, we have one place to change it.
Right, because at some point, there's actually a bit of a history around REST template. Is at first they said, "Oh, we're going to deprecate it," and then they got a huge backlash from the community saying, "What the heck are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, okay, it'll just be in maintenance mode because it does everything you need it to do. It's just not the they wanted to push everybody to web client, which is this basically stream oriented thing, and it's like." I actually don't believe in that. That's actually a good API. I think they're, especially with multi-threaded lightweight threads that are coming in Java. I think a lot of that async streaming oriented has its purposes in certain cases, but like to say it's completely the replacement for this other thing, REST template, which works generally well, or at least it does everything you need to, whether it's easy to use or not, I think is a bit presumptuous. But if we wanted to replace it, then yeah, we would just have to change this one class.
Yeah, but that does touch on the second reason for doing this sort of wrapper, which is that often these third-party APIs are trying to solve a really big general problem.
Right.
And in so doing, they do stuff like, well, this, which is nonsense. It's not what we need. What we want to do is very straightforward and simple. So we've got to translate their complicated API into a nice, clean API. So that's the other. That's I think the second out of three reasons to make a wrapper. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's basically that's serving as a facade as well as hiding the internals. One is to make it nicer, so that's the facade aspect, and then making it easier to replace if needed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think post is a really good example of that. When we say post, we say here's the URL, here's the body,
and eventually then, maybe some headers, but like yeah,
and then it turns into REST template wrapper.exchange. Like, why exchange, right? Well, it turns out in the HTTP spec, the request response is called an exchange, but who knows that?
Yeah, how many people have read the? Raise your hand if you read the HTTP spec.
I've read multiple HTTP specs at this point.
Yes.
2616, and then what's the newer one?
They're in the 7 something. Yeah.
And then the newer one. Did you know that they're replacing the 7x spec?
No, anyway. I haven't. Now I feel out of date. I thought I was so up to date reading the 7000 series.
Yeah. Anyway, so you've got the rare masochists who geek out by reading the the Internet Task Force RFCs, but most people are not going to do that. So this does not make a lot of sense. So turning it down into something really nice and simple, that's the second reason. And the third reason, which is useful for our tests, is to make the HTTP client nullable.
Right.
Is so that if we call .create null on this instead of .create, that will make a version of the HTTP client that works just like the real thing, but does not actually make requests. Yeah, I think there's money to be made from doing a live reading of the RFCs,
especially if it's a good live reading.
Sign up for my Patreon. I don't have a Patreon. Anyway, so yeah, there's the ability to null it out, which is basically make the request, pretend to make the request, but don't actually talk to a server. And the way that's implemented is with this REST template wrapper interface, which is implemented by either a real thing, which just turns around and calls the real thing, or the embedded stub, which, as we saw with the post, just doesn't do anything at all. It's a little bit more complicated with the get because you need to return a pre-configured value, but for the most part, these wrappers or these embedded stubs are not that hard to do. So that's what we're at. We are just been modifying the HTTP client so that we can put headers on our nice little post right here, presumably.
That's, yeah.
Header. Actually, should we do that? Should we do a string to string header?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good. My work, I've done the hard part.
I'm actually just going to make a preference change.
Sure.
Editor. I forget where it is. Is it here? Or is it here?
Are you looking for the line?
Yeah, I'm looking for the code folding. That's what I want. There it is.
Oh, thank you.
So that particular code folding is really annoying because it's optimized for people writing getters and setters, which is an abomination anyway. And then it just makes stuff like that constructor for me just a little bit hard to read.
I knew that something was weird, but I couldn't figure out what it was.
Yeah,
so
that's
thank
what
you
it
for
was.
fixing that.
Yep. That's in my guide to installing. I was installing IntelliJ on a new machine, and it was like, okay, what are all the things I have to change? Oh, there's that one. Oh, there's that one. Oh, turn off the inlay hints. Like all the stuff you went through. It's like I've been now documenting that for myself. So
yeah, you should definitely do a blog on that.
Yeah,
that's gold right there. Okay, so anyway, down in post, we're going to do the headers. So I just typed it in, but we should probably actually introduce a parameter, right?
Yes, because
we want all the tests to update with
that'll be the better way to do it. Yes.
Let me try this. If I say change signature, is that the way to do it, or is it better for me to introduce a parameter?
Well, so that's interesting. Change signature is the direct way to do it. If we don't, so if we knew what the parameters were, or we wanted to do something like map of string ls string headers equals map of and we actually had some headers in here. Then and that worked, then we could push it out as a parameter or introduce a parameter. And basically what would happen is all callers would now pass this in as the parameter. You can do that through change signature as well. You just then have to define what is it going to put for that parameter from the call site.
So Suiji suggests an overload. But my initial reaction to say, actually, let's not, because we aren't going to need it.
Yeah, I was. That's why Suiji says, "Yeah, Yagni." So I agree, Yagni.
So yeah, don't we have the ability to introduce parameter from this code right here?
Yeah. So now we can go ahead and we can just introduce parameter.
Okay. So map.of is better than collections.empty-map here?
Oh, I just wrote map.of because, but we could do empty. Come on. I don't know why it didn't autocomplete. And then we can
probably, again, I've got a setting set a little differently than you do on your machine.
So if we do that, it pushes it out to all the callers. Then what we could do is we could say if we don't like the order, because I don't like the order,
then we change signature.
Then we can use change signature to move things around.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's see if that. Hey, that worked. So I'll take headers, and move it up. Boom.
Everything okay?
And everything looks good.
Okay.
And we can run the tests. Nice.
It should work because that was all automated refactoring.
Yes, but you never know. When it gets the change signature stuff, I'm always like, did I do the right thing? But apparently we did.
Okay, good. All right. So now we need to actually have this pass the headers through.
Right.
That's really a matter of putting it there in the body, right?
Yeah. So basically, this becomes, so it uses, because they're multi-value maps. So do we want the caller to have to deal with that, or do we want to translate it?
I don't understand.
Oh, so a map is strictly one-to-one, whereas headers can have multiple entries for an individual header.
That is true, but so rare.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to worry about it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So we'll put that behind the facade.
Yeah.
So we can do is multi-value map. Whatever this is. String to string. Okay, good. String to string. Let's see. Do they have anything convenient? I don't know which one to use. I guess this one? That seems like not the right one. So what's that one? That's not. Let's try that one. I have no idea what that does. Oops. So that takes. I see. So that takes a map of the string. So we don't want. I don't think we want that. I think we just want this one. And there must be an easier way to transform a regular map to a multi-value map.
I wonder if maybe we should just use a multi-value map here. Is there a equivalent multi-value map.of type of thing? Probably not, right?
I don't know. I don't see
Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Just thinking about the ergonomics of it when we're using this.
Right.
There's two single value map. If it was too much to ask that there was also a from single value map.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the docs to see if there's a better way. There's set all and the documentation is broken.
Oh.
Linked multi-value map headers.
It's working. Oh, no, you're right. The documentation is broken because it doesn't have any actual text.
So there's a set all and then it just says set all under. And I mean, we could try that.
Narim, if I'm pronouncing your name right, says that we can just say new with the headers.
No, because the parameter to the constructor also takes what's basically a multi-value map. Because it's assuming that it's getting a map of a key to a list of values from the other map.
Let's just pass in a multi-value map. It is actually a little more correct. Future-proofs us a little bit on the JSON HTTP client.
Oh, actually, the HTTP headers is what we want because that actually implements the map.
Okay, yeah.
That's actually what we want.
Do it.
So we actually don't want to be working. And this is where, so this is, to be quite honest, I think this is something that Spring does a bad job of documenting APIs. Mm-hmm. Their API Java doc is pretty awful, because what it should really say is you probably want to use HTTP headers here.
Yeah.
Right. Even though it's taking the more general thing, you probably want to use that. And I'm sure the reference documentation says that, but looking at the API Java doc, it does not, and that's really annoying.
Hold on 1 second before you go too much further.
Yeah.
I want to just call this headers.
Oh,
I think it's clear from the context.
Yeah.
And then there's so Sweegie says HTTP headers doesn't have a nice API either. And there is also just sort of this philosophical question of HTTP headers is from Spring again. So if we're wrapping Spring, do we want to expose a Spring thing, or do we want to expose more of an underlying type, such as just a map?
Oh, that's yeah. So how much of a facade are we doing here?
And I think it's not a clear answer to that. Like, I always build a wrapper around third-party code, but frameworks, there's a point at which you sort of have to accept that you're using the framework, because if you try to wrap everything, it turns into this just giant explosion of stuff. So even though from a purist perspective, I don't want to expose anything from Spring outside of JSON HTTP client, from a practical perspective, I often will. But because Sweegie is saying that HTTP headers is kind of crap as well, that's going to push me more in the direction of, well, let's hide that too.
Right.
And I will try to hide these things when I can. It's just that sometimes, you go down that road and it leads to madness.
So where did we end up here? Do we want to basically just go back to just a map of string to string?
I think so. Let's use the code that Sweegie's got. This is where I really wish we had tests around this.
No, that's the target. So this headers is what we're coming from. This is the one that we need to create the variable for. So this is basically HTTP headers. HTTP headers.
I think it's a really good question, Pellet. It's this one we'll have to think about.
Well, we're not treating them as just the autocomplete. So at least not always. Yeah. So one thing that and this is a bit of a tangent based on what Simon was talking about, is having, and I know IntelliJ does a bit of this, is suggesting new APIs, is saying, hey, you probably want to use this. And I think the library vendors and framework vendors could do a bit more of supplying that, because there are tools, and I'm sure there are tools in other languages, but in Java there's tools. There's one called Open Rewrite, and other tools, Error Prone Compiler, that will rewrite this stuff for you because it understands the abstract syntax tree, and so you can run those to migrate yourself from older versions of things to newer versions of things.
That's very much becoming a thing in the JavaScript world. You see the major frameworks starting to publish with each, when they do a breaking change, they'll actually publish, run this thing, and it will update your code for you.
Right.
Which is great. I think that's fantastic. I haven't actually used one of those yet because I tend to shy away from big, complicated frameworks that need that sort of thing.
Right.
Um, so I don't know how well it works in practice, but in theory, it's a great idea.
Yeah. So I've used the one that basically upgrades you from various versions of Spring Boot and JUnit and changes all the things. And it's not just like updating, like ignored to disabled. It's also saying, oh, you actually want to use this instead. Yeah. And then Simon points out, like, Java and C# have especially Java. I think Java is much more concerned about backward compatibility. But it does mean that you can sort of get away with obsolete stuff forever.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you also have the problem of any framework that's been around for a long time has this just sediment of stuff online where you search for how do I do this thing?
Yes.
And you don't find the current thing.
Right.
And this is particularly bad in the JavaScript world because it changes so frequently that it's really hard to find the current information.
Yeah.
For example, as I'm trying to figure out how to do testing with the current version of React, the new React website has nothing on testing in it. I actually opened an issue on the Git repo for the website saying, "Hey, y'all going to talk about testing?" Because you can find the testing on the old website, but those APIs are no longer documented, and apparently they're changing. And so, yeah, it's kind of frustrating. I actually feel like the React documentation, when I looked at it several years ago, was better than it is now. Now it's sort of dumbed down for.
Yeah, they did some big rewrite, and I think that's dangerous because if you take away details, like, you don't do that. Just say, hey, this is updated here, but here's what we used to do or something.
Well, React has really, it looks like they've embraced the idea that we're a library that other frameworks expose. And so the React documentation is kind of like, you know what, it's got some really nice things. So it's not bad. It's got a lot of live stuff going on, and it's well done. And I read through the entire frickin' site in preparation for this stream, just to refresh myself, because if you don't understand how these things work under the covers, it's a struggle. And so it's well done, but there is this sort of sense of, don't you worry your pretty little head, and a sense of, just use that framework over there. It'll take care of everything for you. You'll be fine.
Right.
It used to be that there was documentation, for example, about what script do you actually need to have on imported, like, in your HTML, what script do you use?
Right.
That's not there anymore.
Okay.
And that's because these days you use a bundler.
Oh,
right?
to generate it.
Right. But I actually want to have I want my bundler to not bundle React. I want to have a React script that I import in my HTML. And then, so yeah, it's because now is my bundler pulling in the server code, the client code? It's all, well, the framework will take care of that.
Right. Don't worry about that. That's just abstraction.
And there is a page on, well, if you're not using a framework, and it basically says, well, sucks to be you.
Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, and there was a period of time when Spring was switching over from XML to configure things to Java annotations. I remember on the Spring 3.5 days, and you go on Stack Overflow, it's like, nope. Yeah. No. And, like, you'll still find questions, because Spring is old. I mean, it's 19 years old. I think it just celebrated its birthday. It's more than old enough to drive, but not to drink.
That fact makes me really sad, because I remember when Spring was like the new hotness.
Yeah.
And it was like, I did a lot of Java programming before Spring was a thing. And in fact, I think that was when I was doing the most Java programming, was before Spring was a thing. And then I moved on to C# and then JavaScript.
Yeah. But yeah, like you have to, and then the Spring, basically, we're using Spring Boot 3.0, which is Spring Framework 6, and there's some stuff changed, and now you have to search extra hard, because some of that stuff actually has changed pretty quickly. Some of the security stuff has changed really quickly. Or it's not really quickly, it's just there's a shift a year ago it was this, and now it's this. So even though it has changed slowly, there is these singularities that happen.
It would be interesting because these AI models like ChatGPT, they're trained on this corpus,
yes,
which is a snapshot in time, and they're really expensive to retrain.
Yeah. And ChatGPT
like
is a couple of years old. And so there's stuff where it's like, nope, that's not the right answer. No, that like I was fighting with this. Like, no, that's not the current API. That doesn't work. Or I remember I was having to try and generate mermaid diagrams, which are basically this you can write the text and then it creates a diagram, and it was using just totally wrong syntax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see. I think, AI, LLMs are going through that classic hype curve, right? And now it's in the peak of inflated expectations. And everybody's using it for everything, including things that it really shouldn't be used for.
Right.
I think when it hits that trough of disillusionment, I think people are going to start struggling with it. But it also, in 3 years, when OpenAI is not necessarily going to want to spend the tens of millions of dollars to retrain.
Yeah.
Now, I think there is a possibility to you don't have to retrain it from scratch. I think you can just pull in new stuff. I'm not enough of an AI person to even know how that works. But I think part of that disillusion will be, hey, this has got a certain flavor to it, and it's no longer cool. Right.
I think what'll be interesting is because you can train it on whatever. You don't have to train it on the internet. You can train it. Like I know there are people who've trained it on like a company's code base. You could train it on specific frameworks, and going back to what we were talking about before in terms of like documentation. Like, I don't know if VMware, which basically owns Spring, if they'd want to pay for training a language model on the Spring framework. But wouldn't that be cool? Like it's generated, it only knows about Spring, but only knows about the current Spring, and they train it on that kind of stuff.
Wouldn't that be amazing if there was just a text box you could type on the site, ask our LLM how to do something. Tell me how to do this thing.
Yeah.
Because that is where I don't think it's good for generating code. It doesn't know design. It only knows algorithms. But what it is good at, from what I hear, is when you're a beginner. If I want to know how do I use this API, it's actually really good at getting you started. It's basically customized snippets for tutorials.
Yeah, and if it's trained on because Simon says like it trained on a lot of crap. Yeah, I've looked at a lot of GitHub repos and they're mostly crap because it's a lot of people playing around with stuff. You don't actually see the good stuff. But if they trained it on good stuff, then curated like the AI itself, maybe it can self-curate some of it, but I think you'd have to supply it with like, here's the good stuff, and train it on that.
Yeah. So why do we have yellow squiggles?
Because they're not used.
And so it needs to be just right here, right?
Yes.
Okay. We need to start wrapping here. And I know you have a particular way you like to wrap things.
So I was just reading the code to make sure that... so why is it complaining about this? Really? Oh. See, Luigi led us astray. It's going to be even shorter.
Yeah, using his powers for evil, once again.
So let's get rid... Do you want an empty line here or no? I don't feel like I need an empty line.
I don't think it's necessary.
So let's do that.
So if we're going to do it that way, I would prefer to do that.
I was going back and forth in my head. It's like, do we want to do that or not? So
honestly, the way I do this, and I know it's... Oh, and you know what we might want to do is we might want to change our tabs to be 2 spaces. This is how I do that sort of thing. I just find that visually having the indentation works really well for me.
Although I think I'm going to have it indent in terms of the number of spaces, whatever the default is, because otherwise, every time it does a reformat, it's going to.
I'm with you. But I think it might be nice. We can do this after the stream is over, but I think let's change. Just because we're a little short on horizontal space, let's change it down to a 2-space indent instead of 4.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I used to do 2 and then switch to 4 and then in some cases switch to 8.
Oh wow,
When I'm doing,
that's a lot.
well, my goal was to like, it was more for training to say, if you have to scroll horizontally, your code is too nested.
Right. Yeah,
So,
because there is that problem with
yeah,
lots of nesting
yeah,
for sure.
So,
for sure.
But yeah, for streaming, I think we can go to 2 spaces.
So I use smart
Tabs.
tabs these days because that way you can choose. But of course, GitHub doesn't like it because it defaults to 8 spaces when it
Yeah,
sees a tab.
yeah, and then it's weird. Like you have to keep in mind, like, you know, are you interacting on GitHub and doing pull requests and reading it there? And yeah.
I'm stubborn, as you know, so I just do it anyway.
Yeah.
um,
Okay, so now
and you know, there is a CSS setting for how many spaces should a tab be. I actually have it set on my website. You can tell it this is how wide a tab is. But GitHub, for whatever reason, doesn't expose that.
Yeah, so Simon mentions the editor config. I don't know if GitHub pays attention to that. It really should.
They might. I've never tried it.
Yeah. Because IntelliJ, you can have it generate from your current settings. You can have it generate an editor config file that'll have things like how do you indent and how much.
So yes, Pellet, I will get right on that in my copious spare time, generating an LLM on Nullables.
That would be nice.
It would be nice. The testing without mocks pattern language has been out for 5-6 years, so it's probably somewhere in the in the language model.
Yeah.
Whether it's in there enough that because it didn't really start hitting popularity until I did the rewrite.
Right.
So whether it's in there enough to
start affecting its auto completion.
I haven't tried actually asking it generate a nullable HTTP client for me. That would be interesting.
All right, so so we've got our post. Everything is now not yellow.
Mm-hmm. We don't know if it works,
but at least our tests pass.
Yeah, well, they should still pass because we haven't changed any of the things that would affect the stub.
Just checking.
So what we need to do now, and this is something, again, Chad, that some of you all might not have seen yet, we have the ability to track the requests. And this is not related to being nullables, but it is part of the testing without mock pattern language. You don't have to make something nullable to have the tracking, output tracking on it, but they kind of go hand in hand. So where do we have that? Somewhere in here. Get returns, blah, blah, blah. I thought it was in here down at the bottom. Oh, it's after the example TTO. Can I move this?
Yeah.
I expected that to be.
Also did. So yes.
Somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, so requests are tracked. And what we want to be able to do here is say that when we do a post and we pass in a certain set of headers, we will see those headers come back in our post output.
Right.
So that will mean modifying the JSON HTTP request.
Yes.
So let me actually check this in before we start working on that. So we now JSON HTTP client post sends headers.
Yep.
So yeah, I think what we should do is go actually into here and modify that to have headers associated with it.
That's a create get. That's the URL. Create post. Post URL body. Right. So we're gonna have to modify the constructor. Presumably, we'll just pass in. Do we want null or empty map for the get? Like, what do we want by default?
Let's do empty map because technically you can send headers with a get. We're just not supporting it yet.
Right. So is this where we should start changing it?
Do we have tests on this? I don't think we do. It's just a value object.
Yeah, so it's this dot. And this is...
May I?
Yeah, I was just thinking, what is this? Is this a map, or is this the actual headers, HTTP headers object?
I think it's a map. I think it's because it's going to be used in our tests primarily.
Oh, okay.
And we want it to be something that's really easy to work with.
Yeah.
Also, the HTTP headers is not exposed outside of our JSON HTTP request, so that's all encapsulated anyway. But I think you're in the wrong spot here.
Well, what I'm going to do...
you're going to elevate it.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, I know what setting you don't have on. Okay. That's not better. Create the field. String. And then push this out.
Where did I? I've been moving my cursor around, and I think that was my bad. Sorry. Hold on one second.
Yep.
You pressed a button, and it popped up a print window.
Oh.
Go ahead.
That was the Command P.
I thought I could go look at something while you were typing, but I think that's the downside of having the shared cursor in Tuple.
Yeah. So then we want to... So this is what it'll be for create get. It'll just create it with an empty map. And then for this, what we want...
well, hold on one second.
Yeah.
I want to make a change here. This may be just me being a little bit pedantic, but I always think of it in terms of URL headers and body.
Yeah, I was going to change that order.
Yeah. Oh, is that what you were working on? I thought you were thinking about what is this going to be?
No, I was, and then I realized that the order is wrong, but that's fine. And so then what we'll do is this. I don't know why it keeps using...
What is that delegate?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what that is. That pops up and then goes away. Is it like a button? I don't know.
I wonder if that's like a little bug, like that delegate is actually something in the UI that it's supposed to be showing that's defaulting.
And then let's see. So we want this up. Okay.
Yeah. So for this one, we might end up wanting to put overloads on it in the future, but that'll be easy enough to do in the future.
Yeah. So let's see. So that's that. That's that. That's that. This is now not used. That's fine. So we probably want to create an accessor for it.
Mm-hmm. We might need to regenerate our equals and .toString as well.
So let's erase that while we're here. And we'll use the proper name. And generate hash code.
Hey, Simon, thanks for joining us. Glad you could make it.
Hey, Simon, great to see you. Get some rest. I know it's late where you are. Let's use IntelliJ default. Yep. And this is definitely not null. This and this.
Yeah, but the body can be null.
Yeah. And toString. One of these days I'll change the way IntelliJ generates that. Okay. All right, so we've got the request that has that now, and so we actually now see it here in our test. And so what we want to do is we want to, so this should still pass because it's basically this and that.
Go ahead and run it.
Yeah.
Okay. So now if we post, so we should be able to do a map of, well, actually, let's do it this way. And we'll do a map.of header 1, value 1, header 2, value 2. Am I doing this right?
Yes.
And these are the headers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm more with Suiji. I have a very strong negative reaction to Lombok, and I'm fine with generated toString because I want it displayed the way I want for troubleshooting.
Okay. I'm still having a little trouble reading their syntax. Is that working?
So it's basically saying we could not find this, which makes sense because we didn't pass that in.
Yeah. So we should be able to come into our JSON HTTP client and just put it in the create post.
So actually, I should have followed it back from here. There it is. Hey, look, there's the empty map.
Perfect. Bam. Hey, we might actually get this working before the end of the stream.
All right, that works.
Okay, let's check that in.
Yep.
So what have we done? HTTP client, or it's JSON HTTP client.
Yeah.
Dot post.
Puts the headers in the tracked request.
Yeah, tracks. So I think we're now able to come back to OpenAI client and this test.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this was failing before because the object was wrong.
Right.
Can we just sort of stub something in there? Because we've got 15 minutes left. I'd kind of like to see this working before we're at the end.
I mean, instead of object, we could just create a placeholder record.
Yeah, let's do that.
So we can just say new, well, what do we want this thing to be? This is going to be...
Let's call it placeholder for now.
Can I call it prompt request?
Yeah.
I think that's what it's going to be.
Prompt body?
It's probably prompt body. See, I type something wrong and it gets corrected. I'll put it there for now. And we'll just string message. And okay. We can delete it. Oh, because we're still putting in the object right here.
Yeah.
So let's say new prompt body. Now, did prompt body get put in the tests? Yes, it did. Silly IntelliJ. There we go.
Cool.
Yeah, so in chat they're talking about Lombok, and I have two problems with Lombok. One is it is an awful piece of software that does really nasty things that causes all sorts of problems for everybody that now have to work around it because everybody's using it. And it interferes with refactoring stuff, which is why I don't use it. Oh, thank you, Tramstars.
Is there a faster way to split things into multiple lines in IntelliJ?
There's a way to change. Yeah, there's a bunch of formatting in configuration that you can do. You can. The problem is some of it's line length based, and so it can chop it down, but only if it exceeds the line limit. Otherwise, it does it always. So I'm not sure it will actually help us.
Yeah, I've definitely played around with it in WebStorm because you're constantly, like when you have those object literals, you're constantly switching back and forth between one line and multiple lines.
Yeah.
And there's a context action for put it all on one line.
Right, and then you can invert
There's not
that.
one for put it on. Oh, there it is.
There it is. Yeah.
Lines.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't work properly.
But it doesn't quite. It might be configurable on what it does, but yeah, it doesn't work the way I think we want it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely, maybe it's just for object literals, but it goes one way but not the other in JavaScript. So, okay, so so now we can declare. I do declare that we can say our headers are a map of
authorization to bearer,
authorization and bearer plus API key for not storing off yet.
Right.
And a content type. That's probably going to be automatic.
That's going to be automatic. It should be automatic, but
I'm going to put it in just for documentation purposes.
I'm actually not sure if when it converts it to JSON, if it'll actually add it. I think it will. Create field. Yep.
It does not like that trailing comma.
Yeah.
Something that JavaScript has now that I really like, because once you have that, then you can
move stuff around.
Boop.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, integration test would be nice. I agree, Suiji. Okay, it's complaining about.
Well, because we changed the code and didn't change the test.
Oh, well, that was sure clever of me.
We did it backwards.
All right, so this is mapped out of authorization bearer API key.
Right.
The authorization bearer content type.
And you need to import that.
That should work.
That should work. It does.
Okay. And so maybe we should stop here, but we're very close. So what's left is to do this piece, right? I don't know what's involved in that.
Figuring out what we need. So we can go into our prompt body and we can say, so we can have, I'm going to convert this to a class because I think it might make some of the stuff easier. I don't even know that, well, we'll leave all that. Because what we can do is some of this is like, private final string model equals whatever this is, because this isn't going to change. Well, that might change, but for now it's not going to change.
Yeah, I think it's definitely.
That's basically the model we want to use.
I would like to pass that in and have it be
So
something that we set inside of OpenAiClient as a constant,
fair enough.
because prompt body is not something
Yeah.
that we want to look at very
Fair
often.
enough. In that case, I'm actually going to go back to record. I was actually thinking this was something just standard that you would always send, but you're right. It's actually not. So what we want.
So if we're using a record, basically, do we have to specify all the things?
It's best if we do that. So it's the model, and this is a list of messages, and those messages have two pieces in them. So this is what we're going to call this. We'll call this message DTO for now.
Hey, Pellet. Well, thanks for sticking with me after I irritated you way back in the day. Yeah, I think my opinion on AngularJS was definitely paid off after they completely blew things up, switching to Angular 2.
And so then this is basically string user, no, not user, role, and string content. Yeah. So that represents, so messages is an array of those objects. Those objects are message DTOs, which we could just call message.
Dr. Verm, Angular is still really popular in the .NET shops I talk to, interestingly enough. Angular and .NET seem to go hand in hand for a lot of folks. I'm not a big fan of Angular.
Angular is really, really popular. I don't know if it's still true today in big enterprises. For whatever reason, it was the first one that got adoption from enterprises because of the way that it did whatever it did. I don't know.
The two-way binding was its big thing. But you talk about heavyweight magic frameworks, and Angular is right there in the dictionary next to it.
Yeah, I know that when I was doing stuff for Visa, I don't think I'm breaking any confidentiality. They were big into Angular.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a financial industry thing, because as I think about who I've talked to recently that's using Angular, they're all financial companies. So I got to say, looking at the Java approach to doing this JSON, I really like the JavaScript object literals, because it's so much easier. You're just going to put in the object literal, you'll replace a couple of variables. It's going to be right in line inside of OpenAiClient, and then you're done.
Yep.
Although using the records is not bad, for sure.
Actually, this could be a record.
Are you passing the role in the content?
Come on, convert to record. No.
I think for me with the front-end frameworks is that the front-end world is more prone to the new shiny syndrome than just about any other aspect of the software industry. And as a result, you can, and UIs are expensive to build. Like, a UI is often more expensive than a backend in terms of all the little pieces that you've got to put together.
Yep.
So you combine that with the new Hotness syndrome, and you're rewriting your front end every couple of years. That's a major expense, and it's not money well spent in my mind.
Yeah.
So I've always been very conservative about adopting new technologies, because I hate maintenance costs, and I'm even more so in the front end world. I think of all the front end frameworks, I'd choose React because it's more established than the shiny new things. I know Vue's not that new at this point. And
Vue's at 3, and I think the ecosystem is big enough. But now you've got all the newer players like Svelte, and I don't know. Yeah. I don't even know what's what anymore.
There's always going to be a new player. My rule of thumb is, for anything that I'm going to use, I want it to be 5 to 10 years old. The older, the better.
Yeah.
And I want there to be a history of not breaking things when you upgrade.
Right.
I do not want to waste my time because the nightmare scenario is you have to install an update for a security patch. You must install the security patch. You have no choice, but it only works on the newest version, which you've put off upgrading to because it does massive changes to your code and requires a 3-month refactoring or rewrite of your front end or your code base. And we've seen this, like this
Yes.
happens.
Yeah.
There are people in the Rails world who spent good money maintaining their forks of like lots and lots of money maintaining forks of Rails just because they didn't want to upgrade.
Right.
So yeah, I want to see a long history of stability before I adopt a fancy framework. Libraries, it's not a problem. If I can wrap it and
Right.
hide it, it's no big deal. But a framework that needs to own my world, I'm going to be super cautious about it. Test libraries are the same way. It's very hard to wrap a test framework, even though I try. And switching those is super expensive as well.
Yeah.
Dr. Verm, React is actually agnostic to TypeScript and JavaScript, but all the library or the frameworks that use React, I think have gone to TypeScript.
Yeah, that's another thing that enterprises sort of have had to adopt is some kind of type static typing. Just because
I think any large program you need, you don't need static checking, but you need type checking.
Yeah.
And I've got a large project that started before TypeScript that I use dynamic checking. I just have I call it ensure.signature at the beginning of every method that's public. And that has caught every typing issue I've ever had. But also I've got good tests. So the code's very, very bug free. And I actually prefer that to TypeScript because TypeScript is very slow.
It is really slow. Yeah.
When we get to the front end on this, though, you'll see I'm using something called Speedy Web Compiler, which SWC, it's written in Rust. That's not why it's fast. It's fast because it doesn't do any type checking.
Well,
it transpiles their TypeScript to JavaScript.
Yeah.
But that's all you need. You need a fast loop. And then what I've done is I've put another in the build, I've put another target that does TypeScript type checking. So the integration build will do the type checking.
Right.
And the actually let me show everybody since we're almost out of time here.
Yeah.
So if I do a build pick, this is just doing front end.
Right.
That's doing all well, that's actually not doing anything because it only runs if stuff has changed. But so there's the compile. It went by so quick you can't even see it.
Yep.
But if I do a type check, now it's running the TypeScript compiler. It's still pretty fast, but
there's not much there.
That's because there's one file.
Yeah.
But it's still half a second versus what was this? 7 millis? Well, it went too fast you can't even see it.
Yeah.
It's slower overall because of linting. But I think that's probably what I do. But honestly, I'm not going to be switching to TypeScript on my own projects anytime soon.
Yeah, I did.
Just because it's so slow and I'm not getting the value from it.
Yeah, I did TypeScript when I was doing my TDD game using Vue for the front end, and it was nice. But yeah, it was slow running the tests. I'm like, oh my god, these tests are so slow.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But I think the combination of using the Speedy Web Compiler the IDE shows you the type errors.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah. So is this working? You were doing a lot of stuff.
It compiles.
Well, that's good. That's good enough. Let's ship it.
Why not? Or maybe it doesn't compile. Ooh. I thought it compiled. Oh no, here it didn't. Because we didn't do anything there yet. I'm gonna cheat. But I'm gonna take okay.
That should work.
Infamous should. Oh,
so close. What are we missing? Oh, well, because you put the wrong expectation in here. Did you?
Oh, what did we say for prompt?
My prompt.
Oh, yes. Well, of course that's wrong. Yeah, Pella, you never have to worry about taking us off topic.
Yeah, because we do it fine, just fine
Yes,
ourselves.
exactly. All right. That wasn't too
That's
bad.
it. Okay, well, that's actually a pretty good chunk of work.
Yeah.
So what we've done here is, and I'll check in. Um, we've got the. I think we've actually built the OpenAI client, right?
Yeah. Other than trying to figure out where we're going to get the API key from, but that's not OpenAI client's problem. That's the person who's creating it.
Yeah. Let's see. What do I want to say? I'm going to say add OpenAI client.
Trampstars, hit me up on the Discord because I vaguely remember it, but I don't remember who or what, so I can investigate. Yeah, we don't care about the responses yet.
Yeah, oh yeah, that was it. Let me amend that commit. Add open. So let's see.
OpenAI client at least sends the prompt. I mean, it does the post. We just ignore the return.
Doesn't responses yet. I knew we were forgetting something. Hey, from OpenAI's perspective, though, as long as we're sending the prompts, they're getting their money, right?
That's
so
right.
Nothing else really matters.
In fact, that we're getting zero value from it is not their problem.
All right.
Okay.
So yeah, we're a little over time, but do you want to take a moment to debrief?
Yeah. I'll just look over here to her.
So what we've done here is actually, I think it's a pretty good start. We've demonstrated kind of the initial process of connecting to OpenAI. We manually made the request, figure out what the requests and the responses were.
Right.
We set up our HTTP client to allow us to make that request. We had to modify it to have the headers.
Yep.
And then we wrote, and I think this demonstrates why I like using Nullables for this. Because obviously we don't know if it really works yet. We have to do some manual testing on it to make sure that our assumptions here are correct. But we can write these tests without actually talking to OpenAI. And having that low-level adapter means that writing the actual code to do the prompt is super straightforward.
Right.
And so in the future, as we're looking at this code, we don't have to worry about all the complexity of dealing with REST template and everything else. We can just focus on, well, what are our headers? What's our prompt?
Right.
And so forth.
Right.
So that's what we did. Your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it was. It's really interesting how similar this is, even though we're using sort of nullables, which is a slightly different structure than what I've tended to use, but I still tend to have this sort of same separation of like, what do we want from our OpenAI client? Well, we want to basically say prompt with just a prompt, and that's it. And so writing it is very similar. I would have, I wouldn't have an embedded thing, but I'd have still a separate lower level HTTP client-ish thing that would actually just, you got a body that's already converted and has everything in it. You got headers that has everything in it. So that clear separation between sort of building that and then just sending it off is quite similar to what I do.
We started out the stream talking about a difference in design philosophy of top down and bottom up. And I said, well, when we get down to the details, it's probably going to be not that different.
Yeah.
And I think that's true.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. And this was, it's sort of hard to say. It's not really an outside in versus inside out because we sort of started at the bottom.
Yeah, I think what I probably would have done is the step after, so we did sort of the manual testing using the HTTP client. I would have actually, the next step would have been to write a test, a manual JUnit test that did the same thing.
Yeah, and then that would be more of the outside in approach.
Yeah, because I want to see, like, can my code communicate with OpenAI? And then I'd start probably extracting, okay, what do I need to, I need headers. And so it would have been a bit more refactoring oriented rather than sort of writing the stuff.
And I kind of regret that we didn't do that because I think that would have been interesting. The way I approach it is, again, it's sort of bottom up in that once we finish this, I'm going to say, well, let's make sure this really works.
Right.
And we'll write that test
exactly.
and then we'll delete it.
Right.
So it is basically the same thing. It's just what do you do first?
Right.
And the upside of what you're doing, the way you would do it, is I think it's harder to forget to do it.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. Like people, especially when they're under deadline pressure, they're just like keep on going. I personally don't have a problem forgetting these things, so it doesn't bother me. But I can see how it would be a thing if I was in a more chaotic environment than working for myself most of the time.
I think the other thing it does is almost less about forgetting and more about, did I miss something?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, you know, we did it sort of manually with the HTTP client, so maybe you wouldn't miss as much. But, you know, we could have missed the content type, and if that didn't get added in and we forgot about that, we would never have had a test that actually sent that or didn't send it and saw the problem.
Well, maybe, you know, maybe this is my version of outside in, is I always do start out with what do I want to accomplish?
Right.
I don't necessarily write code around it
right.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear that it's not really a you always do it this way or you always do it that way.
Yeah.
Like it depends on the circumstances.
It depends, yes.
But that's not as exciting for people who are looking for, you know, hard and fast.
It's not as contentious, yeah.
Yeah.
If you always say it depends and you always agree that it depends, then
yeah, then you're just wearing adult diapers.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know why I said that.
All right. On that note, anything else we want to say before we depart?
Well, this has been fun. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens next with this. That's great.
Yes.
I'm really pleased with how quickly it went. I thought we'd be bogged down in sort of the HttpClient stuff, but I think that demonstrates how having the nullables be reusable actually does make a difference.
Yes. Yeah.
So
yeah, because if it already had header support, which it should anyway, then it would have even been less work. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're going to be getting into the meat of things really quickly, probably in the next stream.
Yeah.
We need to do the response parsing, which hopefully won't be that difficult.
Right.
I always say that. I'm always wrong. But
we've done it once before with the get, so I think it won't be that difficult.
Oh, if we're both saying it, then
it must have. now we'll be accepting bets.
Yeah. So yeah, next time we'll be finishing out the request, and I think seeing it actually work on the server, which means that we'll probably be getting into the client stuff. Which means I really need to get off my butt and finish figuring out which testing approach I want to use.
And I'll need to finish the mock-up.
Yeah. I've been looking at tools such as React Testing Library and Enzyme, and also in reinvestigating all the testing frameworks like Jest and Mocha is my sort of standby. And so I'll have lots to share next time about what I've discovered on that. And
great.
My opinions about which one to use and why.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. All right. So see y'all next week, Monday, 1 to 4 Pacific. And what's the UTC time?
6. We're there 7 hours later, so 8 p.m. UTC.
Playwright. I haven't heard of that one, Dr. Verm. I'll write that down. And back episodes are not up yet because this is the first episode, but they will go up at jamesshore.com/s/AI-chronicles.
Yep. Oh, and one thing I'm planning on doing is because I've been lazy about our past episodes, but I actually want to create a journal of sort of stuff we learned.
Nice.
So the AI Chronicles journal.
That's the AI Chronicles.
It's the journal of the AI. I don't know. I'll call it something.
Oh, as long as we're doing announcements, I am doing a Nullables office hours free this Wednesday. That is going to be in 2 days.
Oh, yeah.
Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern, 1800 CEST. Just come on in. I'd love to see you there. So
if you have any questions that came up during this stream, especially, go join.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, I think we're done.
Great. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.